Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For today's video, we are going to discuss the identifying the sampling method, understanding ways to collect data. So after we grasp about how to build research design and set the population and sample of a research, we are now going to identify the sampling method that we should use for our research. Now to fully understand the ways on how to collect data, let us first identify or let us first define what is sampling. When we say sampling, it is a process of extracting a smaller portion of the population to form the participants of the research. Sampling is a technique of selecting individual members or a subset of the population to make statistical inferences from them and estimate characteristics of the whole population. Now remember that different sampling methods are widely used by researchers so that they do not need to research the entire population to collect actionable insights, which is we are going to discuss later on. In general class, it is better for us to study for our study to have a sample size that is close to the total population size. The more or the closer the sample or the number of samples to the total target population, the more accurate the generalizations will be. However, class, it is impossible to include every individual in a population. Using sampling techniques in selecting participants can help with this problem. So sampling techniques are a great help for this matter because they are used to gather participants to represent the total population and still draw good and reliable results for the entire population. The results gathered from a sample population can be considered reliable if they are observed true for the entirety of the target population. But it must be noted that sampling is still prone to problems that can affect the quality of the results, and these problems are related to the systematic errors and the sampling bias. Now, here are the problems in sampling. First, we have the systematic errors. When we say systematic errors, it is when the sample population fails to represent the entire population correctly by the researcher. Now, for instance, from the study of the TV series Preferences of Filipino Senior High School Students, if the students chosen for the study are mostly from Luzon and only a handful are chosen from Visayas and Mindanao, then there is an overrepresentation of participants in Luzon or from Luzon. Now, this constitutes a systematic error in sampling. Next is the sampling bias. When we say sampling bias, it is when a researcher selects a sample that does not reflect the general characteristics of the population. Now, for example, in the study of TV series Preference of Filipino Senior High School Students, sampling bias is committed in the researcher intentionally preferred to include more students from Metro Manila as participants from the study than other provinces or regions. This also reflects systematic error since it tends to overrepresent Filipino high school students from Metro Manila. Now let's proceed to the sampling techniques. The sampling techniques are ways of selecting the participants of a sample population. They can be classified into two major types. So we have the probability sampling or random sampling. Number two, the non-probability sampling or the non-random sampling. Now, probability sampling includes the method that uses random selection process in choosing participants of a sample population. Number two, it gives equal chances to the members of a population to be selected as part of the study. And number three, it avoids biases. And number four, it requires a well-defined population. Now, probability sampling is defined as a sampling technique in which the researcher chooses samples from a larger population using a method based on the theory or probability. For a participant to be considered a probability sample, he or she must be selected using a random selection. So here are the types of probability sampling. First, we have the simple random sampling. Second, we have the systematic random sampling. Number three, we have the stratified random sampling. And lastly, we have the cluster sampling. Now, let us explore each random samplings or each types of probability sampling. First, we have the random sampling. When we say random sampling class, it gives equal chances to every member of the total population to get selected as participant of the sample. To be precise, this type of sampling is randomly selected subset of population. In this sampling method, each member of population has an exactly equal chance of being selected. This method is the most straightforward of all the probability sampling methods since it only involves a single random selection and requires a little advanced knowledge about the population. Because it uses randomization, any research performed on this sample should have high internal and external validity. One way of conducting the simple random sampling is by listing all the names of the members of the entire population for the study. Assign a number for each member and choose the participant using the random number generator or the draw lots. Remember that random sampling class requires randomness in choosing the participants, and it is important to avoid any means that will invalidate the randomness of the selection, such as picking inside the ball while drawing out the names. Next is the systematic random sampling. When we say systematic random sampling, uses regular counting intervals to randomly select participants with assigned numbers. This interval called sampling interval, and it is determined by dividing the population size by the desired sample size. So as you can see on your screen, systematic sampling imitates many of the randomization benefits of simple random sampling, but it is slightly easier to conduct. And if you are a researcher, you can use systematic sampling with a list of the entire population. However, unlike with simple random sampling, a researcher can also use this method when they are unable to access a list of their population in advance. Next is the stratified sampling. When we say stratified sampling, it is done by categorizing the population using specific characteristics into subgroups called strata. In stratified sampling, researchers divide a population into homogeneous subpopulations called strata, the plural of stratum, based on specific characteristics like race, gender, location, and etc. Now, every members of the population should be in exactly one stratum. So the researchers rely on stratified sampling when a population's characteristics are diverse. And they want to ensure that every characteristic is properly represented in the sample. So next, we have the cluster sampling. When we say cluster sampling class, it is it randomly selects a group or cluster instead of individuals within a group. So cluster sampling also divides a population into subgroups like stratified sampling. However, unlike stratified sampling, cluster sampling makes each subgroup a similar representation of the population and does not separate them according to specific characteristics. Now, for example, male and female students can occupy a subgroup instead of separating them according to their genders. So next, let's proceed to the non-probability sampling. The non-probability sampling includes the samples are selected using non-random criteria. It is highly depends on the subjective judgment on the researcher. Number three, there are individuals from the population that will not have any chance of being selected. And number four, however, it is easier and less costly. Again, now let us explore each non-random samplings. Now, here are the types of non-probability sampling. First, we have the convenience sampling. Number two, we have the voluntary response sampling. Number three, we have the purposive sampling. And number four, we have the snowball sampling. When we say convenience sampling, it selects participants based on who are easily accessible and available. So while this method is easy and less costly, in generalizations from the result of the responses from the type of the sample are unreliable, as it is very difficult to say whether the selected participants truly represent the entire population. So an example of convenience sampling is when someone has a research about the perception of students about the policies in their school, and they choose to gather responses from their classmates within the classroom. This, by all means, it is convenient but does not necessarily mean that the sample represents the entire population of students in the school. Next is the voluntary response sampling. When we say voluntary response sampling, it allows participants to volunteer themselves as participants in the study. So like convenience sampling, voluntary response sampling also takes advantage of the ease of access and availability of the respondents. However, one weakness of this method is that voluntary responses may have corresponding biases, either to the topic, like strong affinity to the topic, or to the researchers itself. Like their relationship to their personal contacts, these voluntary responses thus lean towards a biased and non-neutral response. Now, for example, for the voluntary response sampling, we have studying students' perception of the policies of your school. So you can gather responses by posting a public link of an online survey form like Google Forms, which can be voluntarily answered by the willing respondents. Ayan. So next, we have the purposive sampling. When we say purposive sampling, it selects the participants of the sample based on who they think are and most relevant to the purpose of the study. So this type of non-probability sampling commonly used in qualitative research, most especially in topics that requires the perspective of experts on a topic. This method requires a clear criteria and justification for including an individual for a set of individuals in the sample. So for example, a researcher wants to gain understanding of the experiences of students who play computer games regularly but still maintain high academic grades. Thus, they purposely select students who fit the definition of the computer gamer using the criteria such as the minimum amount of time spent in gaming and the general weighted average to measure academic performance. So next is the snowball sampling. When we say snowball sampling, it is conducted by using the prior participants as the bridge in identifying other participants. Now, this is usually done when the population is not easily accessible. For example, someone's research about flooding in a barangay requires them to interview residents who have experienced flooding. So without complete record of families affected by flooding in the barangay, they interview the one family and introduces the researcher to a second family to interview. So this second family introduces the researcher to the third family and so on and so forth. So as you can see on your screen, that is a sample, that is an sample image of a snowball sampling. Okay, so let's have a recap. So we have sampling is the process of extracting a smaller portion of the population to form the participants of the research. So remember that there are two types of sampling, which are the systematic errors and the sampling bias. And also we have the two types of sampling techniques. They are the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. And under probability sampling, it includes simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. And for the non-probability sampling, it includes convenience sampling, voluntarily response sampling, purposive sampling, and snowball sampling. Ayan. So next, let's proceed to another topic, which is all about the research methods and techniques. So let us first define what is research methods. When we say research methods, these are specific techniques or data collection and gathering of primary data and secondary data. So research methods or techniques. So first, we have the in-depth interview or IDI. So when we say in-depth interview, it is a process of data gathering through face-to-face conversation where questions are asked and answers are given between the interviewer or ikaw na researcher and an interviewee which is the respondent. So it is in-depth. It is in-depth because the interviewer digs deeper using probing questions and follow-up questions. So the interview sessions are often more than once or a series of sessions depending on the willingness of availability of the respondent. Now, the researcher takes down important interview notes or record the interview using the recording devices. Now, in generally speaking, the research ethics requires that the interviewee needs to know of the nature of the purpose of the interview. So, the identity of the interviewee may also have to be hidden or fictionalized depending on the sensitivity of the conversation. Okay, number two, we have the K-informant interview. When we say K-informant interview, it is a process that is similar to IDIs or the in-depth interview. So except that there is a special emphasis on the imminent status or important values of interviewees. Remember, class, that IDI can be random, but the KII or the K-informant interview are purposive. Number 3, and we have the survey. So when we say survey, it refers to a process of asking questions through non-face-to-face data gathering, often using a pro forma questionnaire that contains the questions to be answered by the respondents. So in using survey, the questionnaires are then collected, tailed, and analyzed for frequency analysis. So next, we have the focus group discussion or FGD. When we say focus group discussion, it refers to a process of group interview where a question is posed by the facilitator or the researcher, and all participants give their answer. So in FGD, the discussions of progress using probing questions and follow-up questions. The answers are properly documented, tailed, analyzed, and afterwards, meta cards or index cards can also be used where answers are written and posted on the wall for reference and trending. Okay, for number 5 class, we have the non-participant observation or NPO. It refers to a process where the researcher systematically observes or watches the subjects or respondents of the study in their natural habitat without interruption. So the researcher is not taking active part in the environment under scrutiny. This is pure observation when you are using this type of research method, the NPO. Next is the K-informant. This is already done. Ayan. Next is the participant observation. When we say participant observation class, it is a process. The process is the same with the non-participant observation, except that the researcher is now involved or taking active part in the environment of the study. So next, we have the archival research or archival research. I'm so sorry, archival research. So this is a process of scoring, digging, examining, verifying, and analyzing documents of all types. So including evidences, artifacts, relics, articles, news clippings, contracts, and other pieces of records. And number 8, we have the content analysis. When we say content analysis class, it is similar process of archival research, but focuses on the content or substance such as meanings, textual, and writing style, context, and subtext and symbols, among others. So lastly, we have the discourse analysis. When we say discourse analysis, it is similar process with the content analysis, but focuses on speech, dialects, vernacular, idioms, narratives, and other collections of words and texts. All these research methods and techniques can be taught and used by one or a combination of research design depending on the requirement of the research problems and objectives. Now let's proceed. So let's proceed to the next slide and let's try if you remember what we discussed. Okay, for the first question, what are those methods and techniques that we've discussed earlier? Anyone? Okay, very good. So we have the methods and techniques are the in-depth interview, the K-informant interview, survey, focus group discussion, the non-participant observation, participant observation, archival observation, content analysis, and discourse analysis. So let's have a recap again. So research methods are specific techniques of data collection and gathering of primary data and secondary data. Now here are the research methods and techniques. So we have the in-depth interview, we have the K-informant interview, we have the survey, next we have the focus group discussion, next we have the non-participant observation, next we have the participant observation, next we have the archival observation, and lastly we have the content next we have the content analysis, and lastly we have the discourse analysis. So do you have any questions, violent reactions, or clarifications regarding with our topic for this afternoon? So if you have questions, since we are running out of time, so you can message me through my Facebook or through my messenger, and then you should ask me a lot of questions, and then I will answer that one as early as I could. Okay. So I think that's it for this afternoon. Thank you for listening. Take care always. By the way, my name is Sir Christian Paul R. Colonel. Thank you so much for listening. God bless us all. So good afternoon, everyone. So I am your instructor for this subject, understanding culture, society, and politics. Now, this day we're going to tackle the cultural variation and the social differences. Ayan. So for lesson one, I want you to look at on your screen and answer this question. So what can you interpret about this image or pictures? So anyone from the class? Okay, very good. Now, okay, we are talking about the feminism. Okay, okay. Some of you here, that women can do things like a woman can do things that men can do also. Yeah. So we are talking about the individual differences. Okay, very good interpretation. So I have here the next question. Do you have any idea on our topic for today? Okay, anyone from the class? Okay, very good. So we are talking about the cultural variation and the social differences in gender. Now, sex and gender, we use the term sex and gender interchangeably. Um, because we think that sex and gender has the same context, but in fact they are different. Now, first we're going to talk about sex. Sex refers to biological differences that distinguishes human and other animals into two main categories, the male and the female. So the very clue on defining the term sex, it is biological in nature. So we have here the three variation in order to identify the biological differences between males and females. First, we have the chromosomal structure, which X and X chromosome are for female and X and Y chromosome for male. Now, next, we have the hormone production. Generally, more testosterone production for males, and more estrogen production in females. Now, what are those examples, or what are the examples under the testosterone production for males? So we have here the um, the when they are going to be a teenager, their voice will be tend to be modulated, and of course, they will be having a Adam's apple. Now, next for the estrogen production in females, we have here an example of they are going to have a um, big hips, and they will also have a Coca-Cola body. Now, next we have the internal and external reproductive organs. Now, when we say reproductive organs, we're talking about the penis and the vagina. Penis for males and vagina for females. Next, we have gender. This refers to social, cultural, and psychological characteristics or traits related to male and female based on a certain social context. Now, this is different from sex, which refers to biological characteristics that distinguish a male from a female. So, um, um, meaning to say, when we say gender, this we are talking about what are those traits or characteristics that belongs to that belongs for female or for males. Now, if sex has a two categories, which is males and females, so gender also have a two types. We have masculine and feminine. So next, we have the gender rules. When we say gender rules, this refers to attitudes and behavior that the society expects a person to exhibit based on his or her sex. So, meaning to say, um, what are those actions what are those actions that belongs to females, and what are those actions that belongs to males? Now, we have here an example. In traditional Philippine society, women are expected to be plain housewives and take care of their children, while men are expected to be professionals and provide the needs of their family. So, so as you can see in traditional life before, in our past, so females are tend to be plain housewives. Their work are to 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 take care of their children, um, doing household chores, and um, doing laundry. Now, for males, before in our past, they are the one who are um, having a professionals who support the needs of their families. Okay, now let's proceed. So we have here the gender roles in pre-colonial Philippine society. Now, as you can see on your screen, we have sex, which identify if either male or female. Now, next we have gender rule. So, gender rule. So, what are those characteristics or traits or attitudes that belongs to male or female? And then, and their task. Yeah. So, first, we have male. Now, the gender rule for male during the pre-colonial society, they are the one who called dato or raha. Their task is to lead the barangay, act as judge to settle community concerns. Yan. So in short, um, there are those leaders during that time. Next, we have the bagani. When we say bagani, they protect the barangay against the enemies. So meaning to say, they are those soldiers before. Now, let's proceed to female. When we say female, we have here the gender role binokot, which means acted as keeper of the community's history and culture. So, in layman's term, they called as historian. Next, we have farmer and land tiller. They nurtured the land where crops were grown, there was a belief that women were more fertile because they bleed once a month, thus plants and crops could be nourished by them. So before they believe if women can be a farmer, they will experience a um, 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 what we call that they will have a um, masaganang pag-aani o masaganang pagtanim. Yan. So next we have male and female. Now, the gender roles for both sex, male and female, we have merchant. They are traded crops and other products with other merchants. Or to make it clear, when we say merchant, there are those we called mga negosyante. So next we have potter, made pots and other earthen products. So they are the one who make plates, bowls, and vases. Next we have weaver. When we say weaver, they are the one who made clothing through weaving. So they are the one who make clothes, what we call that, um, blankets or etc. Next we have babaylan. So when we say babaylan, acted as shaman and performed spiritual and social rituals. So meaning to say when we say babaylan, so we are talking about those mga albularyo. Yan. So they are the one who called priestess, yan, seer, and the healer. So next we have the gender roles in the Philippine society during the colonial period. So we all know that we have been colonized by three different periods. First, we have the Spaniards, Americans, and Japanese. Now, during the period of during the Spanish period, um, the gender role of male and female changed drastically. Why is it changed? Because during this period, only men has given the opportunity to work and to become professionals and to become leaders, while housewives are always inside of their houses who took care of their children and the household. And also, um, during the Spanish period, the gender role of female are they are trained for life in the monastery. So next we have the American occupation. So in American occupation, our gender rules has changed. So both male and female experience the same rights in a society. So what men can do, what men can do will be mahimo pod sa female. For example, if men can be laborers, then women can be laborers. If a male can become educated and professionals or leaders, then female can do it as well. Next, we have the Japanese occupation. Now we have here in Japanese occupation, it changed again. So so the male, they are the laborers who provide for the family, and of course, they work as guerrilla soldiers. Now, and then for female, they become again a housewife. Why they become housewives again? Because in this time, um, women are kept because um, um, ginaiwa or they have been protected, ginaprotektahan sila para sa mga Japanese soldiers na mga magtas. So, and other females gender roles in this occupation, and Japanese occupation, become guerrilla soldiers and supporters. So next, we have gender roles in current Philippine society. So nowadays, both men and women are allowed to perform different tasks not based solely on gender. So as you can see, there's a lot of female that can work that can work that can work sa mga panlalaking mga trabaho, and there are men that works na sa pambabae na mga works. So next we have gender system. It tells us how gender and gender roles are a product of one's biological sex. In a society with this system, it is normal and expected for males to be masculine and females to be feminine. However, this is always not the case, especially in contemporary and modern societies, because there are fields na hindi kagaya noon na para lang sa babae, but in our modern societies, for example, in the field of doctors, engineers, architect. So kung dati puro lang sa mga lalaki yan, ngayon pwede na sa mga babae. Next, if sa mga field naman sa mga babae or females, so for example, there's teachers, hairstylist, hairdresser, ayan. But in our modern contemporary, marami na din tayong mga lalaki na teacher, hairstylist, and mga nurses. Next, let's proceed to the LGBTQI. Now question, what does LGBTQI stands for? Anyone from the class who would like to answer? Okay, very good. So when we say LGBTQI, we are talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, and intersex. Now, when we say lesbian, it is a woman who is emotionally, romantically, and sexually attracted to other women. So, in our current society or in our modern society, we call lesbian as tomboy, tombalata, tombaling. So, next we have gay. So, these are men attracted emotionally, romantically, and or sexually to men. So, ito pong tinatawag natin ng mga bakla, bayot, shoyot, yan, bading. So, next we have bisexual. When we say bisexual, it is a person who is attracted to two sexes or two genders. So, ayan. So, ito pong tinatawag natin ng maya. Yan. So transgender, when we say transgender, shortened as TJ, these are people whose gender identify differs from the social expectation for the physical sex they were born with. So next, we have queer or questioning, a person who is attracted to multiple genders. So it could be lesbian, transgender, gay, bisexual, female, or male. Next, we have the intersex. When we say intersex, we're talking about the intersexuality. It is a set of medical condition that features congenital anomaly of the reproductive and sexual system. So meaning to say, he or she has a two reproductive organ. So, do you have any question about our topic for this afternoon? Ayan, none so far. None so far. Okay. Thank you so much. So let's proceed to our next topic. So our next topic, we're talking about the cultural variation and the social differences in socioeconomic class. Now, when we say socioeconomic class, it refers to a category that groups of people with similar socioeconomic, social, cultural, and political status. Now we have here some of the example of the general determinants of socioeconomic class. Now when we say money and property, this belongs to economic. Now when we say connection with influential person, we are talking about social. Now when we say academic degrees, We are talking about culture. Ayan. So, we have here an example of socio-economic class in terms of occupation. So, white collar jobs such as doctors and lawyers and other professionals are viewed to be prestigious, while blue collar jobs like construction workers and janitors are socially stigmatized. And same for education. For education attainment of undergraduate degrees or higher, like master's and doctoral degree, is met with admiration in the society. So deficiency or absence of formal education, in contrast, invites disapproval from societal members. So another example of socioeconomic class, we have the caste system of India. So as you can see, um, we can identify who are those people who belong to upper class and lower class. So we have the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaisyas, Sudra, and Dalits. Next, let's proceed to the government during the pre-colonial period. Prior to the coming of the Spaniards, the community was called a barangay that was headed by Datu or Raha. Yan. Now, the barangay is the pre-colonial political unit which is composed of 30 to 100 families. So the word barangay from the word barangay comes from the boat of balangay. So the balangay is yung uri ng barko. So dato or raha. So they are the chieftain of the barangay or in the Muslims community. So today we called it as barangay captain or kapitan. So next we have the socioeconomics during the pre-colonial period. Now, our ancestors were divided into three different groups. We have the Maharlika, Timawa, and Alipin. When we say Maharlika, we are talking about those people who belongs to aristocracy or kumbaga ba, there are those people who are rich. Yeah. So they are the first social class. So they compose of community leaders and their families, also called the group of Maginoo, Raha, or God. Now Timawa, pronounced as Timawa, or they are called in English freemen. They are the second or the middle social class. Um, Timawa composed of all freemen living in the barangay and consists of workers, warriors, merchants, and other who were not under debt bondage. And of course, when we say Timawa, there are those persons who have their own properties, such as houses and pieces of land to cultivate. Lastly, we have the Alipin or slaves. Now, they are the third or the last social group in the pre-colonial period. Um, Alipin serve another person or family as payment for debt. We're not bound to their masters for life. Why is it they are not bound for their masters for life? Because they could go back to their previous status as soon as they pay off their debts. Or if they marry a Maharlika who will then pay their debt. Yan. So there are two types of alipin. The aliping sa gigilid and aliping namamahay. When we say aliping sa gigilid, there are those person who don't have right to own any property, and also often came from family of slaves or were captives in war, and could also be sold or exchanged for goods or other slaves. Now, when we say aliping namamahay, had their own properties such as houses or pieces of land, often from the Mawa class, and became slaves because of debt or punishment for wrongdoing. Could go back to being part of the Timawa class once they pay off their debt. Yeah. So we have here the socioeconomic status of Philippines during Spanish colonial era. So it was arranged from the highest to lowest. Yeah. So we have Peninsulares, Insulares, Ilustrados, Chinese Mestizos, and Indios. Now, when we say Peninsulares, we are talking about those people with Spanish blood and were born in Spain, while Insulares, people with Spanish blood and were born in the Philippines. And Ilustrados, there are those Filipinos who were able to study abroad, like Jose Rizal. Chinese Mestizo are those mixed race of Chinese and Filipino. And Indios, we have native Filipinos who were born and raised in the Philippines. Okay, next. We have here the three general socioeconomic classes, which identifies the upper, middle, and lower class. So, so in upper class, in our population, there are only 10% who belong in the upper class. So who are those persons who belong for the upper class? So we have the wealthy industrialists with big corporations and owners of large plantation or haciendas. Now for middle class, we have 20% of our population here in our nation or in our country are those professionals, skilled and semi-skilled workers in offices, factories, or farms. Next, we have lower class. Now 70% of our population. So there are those the laborers and unskilled workers. Now, we have also here the socioeconomic class in terms of income. So we have here the Philippine income classes. So, as you can see, we have the income cluster, definition of per capita income, and we have the range of monthly family incomes for the family size of 5 members. So you will be considered poor if your monthly income will be less than 9,520. Sorry, and you can be considered in the middle income if your salary or your monthly salary will be ranged between 38,080 pesos to 66,640 pesos. Now, you will be considered rich if your income will be at least 190,400 or more than that. So, we have here another socioeconomic class systems according to Karl Marx. Karl Marx is the proponent of the socioeconomic class system or the conflict system. Yeah. So we have here the bourgeois and the proletariats. When we say bourgeois, it is the class that owns the means of production. We have the monetary, land, technological capital, which are needed in order to initiate production. So there are those persons who do not have to work since they are already gaining money just for owning and investing their capital. Next, we have proletariats. They are those person who is not an owner of the means of production and must work in order to survive. So um, these are our parents that we have. So so obviously we can see the difference between the classes of economic and social status. So since we are done discussing our lesson 2, do you have any questions? Okay, none. Okay, let's proceed to our next lesson. Yeah. So on our next lesson, we're going to talk about the cultural variation and the social differences in exceptionality and non-exceptionality. So I have here a short activity. Now, imagine yourself preparing for school, fixing yourself, making some breakfast and snacks. You walk You walk or ride a vehicle in order to get to your school. You arrive on time, and the usual school day starts. Now imagine doing all this. If you were blind, how will you cope? How will you manage doing all activities without your sense of sight? Is it easy or is it difficult? So, anyone from the class who would like to answer? Anyone? Okay, very good. So it is very difficult because you cannot see anything or everything. So you need to have a guidance, or you need to have partner that will guide you and everything you do. So for those students who don't know what is a blind child, so I have here a sample picture. So as you can see on his right side, so uh, that thing called braille. So that is um, one way to learn words, or to read things using the braille. So um, ito po yung braille na yung ginatusok-tusok nila ilang kamot so that they will understand um what are those letters or words na ilahang gina read. Next, we have the disability, exceptionality, and non-exceptionality. Now, when we say disability, it is a term that refers to a condition wherein the loss of physical functioning, hearing, and vision, or impairments of intellectual, social, and mental processes hinder normal growth and development of an individual. So, sila yung mga bulag, bingi, pipi, um, mga may pagkukulang sa pag-iisip. Now, next, we have exceptionality. When we say exceptionality, it is a quality or characteristics of a person that makes him or her different from established norms in a society. So, um, um, those disabled person can be considered exceptional because they are different from the normal person. And those who are very smart, or we call it genius, gifted, talented, they belong here also in an exceptional because they are different from those normal person. So when we say non-exceptional, we are talking about those normal person. So it is only used to differentiate between exceptional ones and those who are not considered normal or non-exceptional. Okay, next we have labels. Labels is very important um, in in exceptional because um, it is used for societal members to hold different types of exceptionality. Because if we have labels, we can avoid bullies, discrimination for those person who are different from the normal. So we have here some labels that referring to those persons who are not normal. So we have gifted, talented, deaf, blind, and dyslexic. There are only some of the labels used for people to refer to individuals possessing characteristics or ability of the exceptional. So do you have any questions? Okay, none? Okay, let's proceed to our lesson 4. Okay, for our lesson 4, we're going to talk about the cultural variation and social differences in terms of ethnicity. When we say ethnicity, this is used to denote the shared culture of these groups, which includes cultural heritage, language or dialect, religion, traditions, and rituals, norms, values, beliefs, and other practices. Now, this refers to a group of people who also called ethnic group. When we say ethnic group, this refers to a specific group of people having certain similar characteristics and distinct cultural identity, which distinguish them from other groups in the community or society. For example, we have Tagalog, Ilocano, Ifugao, Kapampangan are all examples of an ethnic groups. Now, race. So, when we say race, we are talking about the physical attributes of a person. So, what are those physical attributes or characteristics of a person? First, we are talking about the skin color, um, facial features, the hair textures and color, and some of the commonly known for racial attributes are black, white, or Asian. So we have here the three major races, namely Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. Now, as you can see on your screen, we have here the table. We have the physical features and the race. So, in terms of Caucasoid, in terms of the skin color, we have fair, light colored, or straight wavy. Their eyes are round, and their nose are high nose bridge, and Caucasoid can be seen at the Americas and Europe. So, Mongoloid, ayan, so you will read that one, and then the origin from the Mongoloid is from Asia, and Negroid are from those person who belongs to Africa. Yan. So therefore, the difference between race and ethnicity is that race is constructed from biological characteristics, while ethnicity is constructed by cultural traits. Next, let's proceed to ethnic and ethnolinguistics groups in the Philippines. Now, there are more than 100 ethnic or ethnolinguistics group in the Philippines which are based on the language each group uses. So imagine in our country we have 100 ethnic or ethnolinguistics. So meaning to say we have different language that we use. So we have here another example of ethnolinguistics in Cordillera that has several ethnic groups such as Bontok, Ibaloy, Ifugao, Ikalahan, Isnig, Itnig, Kalinga, and Kankanai. And other smaller ethnolinguistics groups are Ibanag, Ivatan, Sambal, Subanon, Maguindanao, and Zamboangueño. Next, we have the 8 major ethno-linguistics groups in the country. First, we have Ilocano, Kapampangan, Pangasinense, Tagalog, Bicolano, Ilonggo, Cebuano, and Waray. Now let's proceed to the issues about race and ethnicity. First, we have the racism. This is the discrimination or prejudice based on one's race. As you can see, um, black person always encounter racism for those white person, or vice versa. Now, next, we have the genocide. Now, genocide refers to the elimination of a group of people from the same race, ethnic group, religion, or nation. So, we have here an example of genocide that are millions of Jews was killed during the World War II. Next, we have the ethnic cleansing. This refers to harassment, rape, or forced migration of an ethnic group to banish them from a certain area or territory. So these ethnic groups are commonly seen, or the ethnic cleansing are commonly seen or commonly happen in a country in Africa. So next, we have religion. So religion is a set of beliefs and ritual practices related to symbols which are considered as sacred. So ethnic groups may have different symbols which they consider sacred. And the difference of these symbols also entails the differences in how these symbols are expressed in a cultural group's beliefs, systems, and rituals. Now, animism is one of the earliest recorded religion in society. So, what does animism? So, animism is the belief that spiritual forces reside in natural elements of the physical world. For example, trees, stones, water, and fire. As a result, such elements were considered sacred, which invoked veneration and respect for nature. So, in our modern society, we have here um, major religions that we have worldwide. So, we have Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Judaism, Taoism, and Shintoism. So we have also the Anti-Ethnic or Racial Profiling Act and Discrimination Act of 2011. It was approved by the Senate, which prohibits discrimination against race, ethnicities, and religious affiliations in terms of job opportunities, distribution of social services, and improvement of standards of living. So, any questions? Okay, none so far. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next, let's proceed to our next topic or our last lesson. So, this time we're going to talk about the cultural variation and the social differences in nationality. Now, a nation is a large group of people with autonomous status and has its own government. It usually own a specific territory called states or nation. So for example, is Philippines can be considered as nation because we have people with autonomous status and we have our own government who rules and guide us in terms of daily living. Next, we have the definition of nationality. Now, to make it clear, when we say nationality, we are talking about where we are born. So, meaning to say, saan ba tayo pinanganak? So, ano ba yung nationality natin? Ano ba yung nationality natin? Yung pinanganak tayo. So, we have here the acquisition of one's nationality. So, we have jus sanguinis, jus soli, and naturalization. When we say jus sanguinis, we are talking about the right of blood, which nationality of parents is passed on the children. So jus sanguinis commonly used in our country, Philippines. So we have here if both parents are Filipino, then the nationality of his and or her child will be Filipino. Next, we have the jus soli or jus lucy, or in English, the right of soil. It is one's nationality is determined by the territory or land wherein the child is born. So, for example, this practice, the jus soli are laws in the America or the nationality law of America. So, for example, both parents are Filipino but gipanganak ang bata in sa America. So the nationality of the child will be American. So next we have naturalization. When I say naturalization, it is a legal process of acquiring nationality from different state. So in this type, we are going to have a um, court appeal or something that um, um, using laws and and legal process. So that is naturalization. So that's the end of our unit 1. So I hope that you understand our discussion. So although this is very new to us, this is um, first time that we have our online class, but I hope that we will adopt the changes that we have right now. And I want you to keep all safe and believe that this pandemic will be end soon. So goodbye everyone, and thank you so much for listening.